Leighton Gray is next up to anchor the panel. He is a constitutional litigator and a senior partner with the firm Gray Walk Spencer LLP. He has conducted hundreds of trials before Alberta courts and is considered one of the Alberta's top criminal trial lawyers. He's also the host of the Gray Matter podcast, so make sure to check that out. That's Grey, Gray Matter podcast. And he personally had the chance to cross-examine Dina Hinshaw when she was Alberta's problems and not ours. Please help me welcome Leighton Gray.
Guten Tag, wie geht es Ihnen heute? John Carpe knows what I just said. It's Edelweiss Club. I want to start by saying that you don't have to worry about me going over time because I actually timed this presentation. It'll tell you a lot about me. Benjamin Franklin said, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. Omar knows what I'm talking about. It's a lawyer problem. If you're doing it right, and hopefully we are most of the time. I want to start with just a couple of things. Thanks, actually. First of all, to Gott im Himmel, and also to the organizers of the event, my wife Jennifer, who's here, and all of you. And a special thanks also to John Carpe, who you're going to hear from, because he offered me an opportunity that you just heard about to get involved with the case there. And working with the Justice Center has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my whole career. So thanks, John. And also to Mr. Honor, who you just heard from. The Democracy Fund reached out to me, and they gave me the opportunity to represent some really good people as well. So thanks, Alan. Okay, so why am I here? Is that quotation up there yet? Could you put that up on the big board? Everybody know they're John Milton? Okay, so you heard about my podcast. I've been writing a book. And so what you're going to hear is a little bit from my book. I promise a little. And if you like what you hear, then you can go and check out my website and learn more. And better yet, if you're offended, I really want you to go and check out. Because you hear from people like Dr. Mackis and John Carpe, who are and of course, Chris Scott. So my topic is the price of speech is not free. And I'd like to frame it in this way. You heard from Dr. Lugosi and some of the other lawyers here. And a lot of what you heard is sort of looking at the tops of the trees, especially in terms of freedom of speech. So I'd like you to do is maybe cast your gaze down from the tops of the trees and down and look down at the roots, okay? So it starts with a quotation. Many of you have heard this. It's attributed to Voltaire. We're not sure if it was he wrote this. He said, "I may disagree with what you have to say, but I shall defend to the death your right to say it." Most people have heard that one, right? Okay. So we can all agree that as Canadians, we can justifiably demand public hearings into government abuse of executive power during the COVID-19 pandemic. These hearings ought to have occurred long ago, and when they do happen, God willing, they will undoubtedly vindicate many Canadians, some of whom are here, who suffered under the capricious authoritarian rule of public health officials like Dr. Bonnie Henry and Dr. Dina Hinshaw, both of whom are here in BC. It's your problem now. I can't say the person we have in Alberta is much better at the moment, though, I'm afraid. At the core of this investigation I'm talking about, which hasn't happened, must be an inquiry into government campaigns to manipulate public opinion. And you've heard a lot about that this weekend. So we know that public officials misrepresented opinion as fact and covertly suppressed contrary opinion, even those expressed by the eminent scientists who crafted the Great Barrington Declaration 6 months into the pandemic. And Dr. Mackis is here. He actually signed that. And maybe some of the other doctors here probably did as well. But the pronouncements of bureaucrats who cared more for their own celebrity and power than truth went largely unchallenged. And this represents an utter failure of charter guarantees to free speech. A failure which evidences a completely unbridled and expanding Canadian bureaucracy. And so it's tempting to think that tyrannical public officials are ultimately to blame for our embarrassing foray and descent into censorship. But if we accept this pat explanation readily, assign scorn, and then just move on, we risk ignoring entirely the cultural rot that is far more insidious and dangerous than any government overreach. It is we Canadians, not government bureaucrats, not Justin Trudeau, who must bear the lion's share of responsibility for censorship. And this is because we are the last line of defense against the suppression of speech. It is we who have lost sight of our appreciation for the essential right which defines a free and democratic society. And this is the freedom of speech, which is carved out of centuries of bloody conflict and civil discourse. The right which John Milton wrote of in his 17th century treatise, Areopagitica, which is on the board. He said, "Give me the liberty to know, to utter, and to argue freely, according to conscience, above all liberties." And it's important to note the context of that speech. This is 1644. He's making a speech to Parliament in 1644. Guess what he's talking to them about? Censorship. Okay? Not a new problem. This is a story old as time. So here is one of the greatest crafters of in the English language ever, one of the greatest authors of his time, and he's in Parliament, and he's speaking out in favor of free speech. He's talking about the importance of it. And the rest of my talk is about what Milton was saying, which is just as relevant today. So it begs the question, why should we exalt free speech? Well, because a culture of free speech is a kind of essential public good. It attacks nascent tyranny by disseminating information. And since it is only controversial speech, which attracts the kind of limitation that Mr. Honor was talking about, exercising free speech often comes with notoriety. Talk to Chris Barber. Talk to Chris Scott. Talk to Dr. Mackus about this. This room is filled with people, John Carpe, who know the cost of free speech, the cost of speaking out. And even me, if you want some fun, you can go Google my name. CBC did a nice little hit piece on me, and actually I'm grateful now that they did, although it was not fun at the time. It's not fun to live through cancel culture. I wouldn't wish it on anyone except perhaps Justin. But, you know, just like nearly every type of public service, free speech most often comes at a private cost to the speaker. You can't avoid this. So as a matter of principle, citizens will sacrifice themselves through unpopular speech because they love their country and they respect their fellow citizens. They will make that sacrifice. But as a prerequisite for this self-sacrificing speech that Milton's talking about, rational patriots expect something in return. It's not money. They need to know that enough of their fellows believe in the value of controversial speech, even if a particular opinion may be wrong. Okay? Otherwise, the social cost of speaking out or of supporting those who do can be heightened by tyrants until even the most courageous are silenced. No institutional legal protections, no piece of paper, no Bill of Rights, no matter how well designed, can induce sacrificial speech when the social value of such speech is not precious. As Milton put it, who kills a man kills a reasonable creature, God's image, but he who destroys a good book kills reason itself, kills the image of God, as it were, in the eye. Many a man lives a burden to the earth, but a good book is the precious lifeblood of a master spirit, embalmed, and treasured up on purpose to a life beyond life. So during the pandemic, too many Canadians stood idly by in the face of censorship. While some of this suppression came as social media meddling by public officials, most of it was actually perpetrated by our own neighbors. Busybodies who shamed skeptics until they simply ceased asking questions. People like the stupids that Omar met that day. Most of us did not protest either. We should have. But it was the brave and concerted effort of a group of truckers like Chris Barber who finally organized and executed the greatest public protest in our nation's history, the Freedom Convoy. But it was our failure to defend the public against censorship. Our failure to defend the public against censorship is more dangerous than censorship itself, since it reveals that there is no longer broad agreement upon the principles underlying free speech. I'll take the example of the Nazis. Most people have the misunderstanding that there was an evil group of people led by Hitler and others who just took over Germany and tyrannized them for 12 years and tried to destroy the earth and take it over. The truth is, when you study the Nazis, that it was the German people who oppressed each other. And if you read the work of people like Hannah Arendt, who wrote a book called The Origins of Totalitarianism, it tells the true story of what happened in that country. And it's the same type of thing that was happening here during COVID. And this is my essential point about censorship. So let's put this in the context of Bill C-11, which will control what Canadians can post online. It's now been passed. It's here. So in a familiar foray into ironic virtue signaling nonsense, Prime Minister Trudeau pronounced publicly last November that his focus has always been, wait for it folks, has always been upon being a bastion for our individual rights and freedoms. He said this, I can't do the voice, and I won't. This government will never back down from standing up for people's rights and freedoms, end quote. Tell that to Tamara Leach. Tell that to Chris Barber. Tell that to Pastor James Coates, if you know about him in Alberta. Pastor Timothy Stevens. In his next breath, Trudeau then set out the limits to be placed upon our free speech. Not his speech. He can say anything he likes. And these limits really are the diametrical opposite of what giant intellects like Voltaire and Milton expressed. He said that we are free to express our opinions so long as they do not offend others. This is, of course, the radical perversion of liberalism, a liberal interpretation of what John Stuart Mill, his famous liberal maxim, the right of your fist ends where my nose begins. It's taken to a radical extreme. But did Mill actually mean to say that any speech which offends is prohibited? Indeed, this begs another question of whether any meaningful conversations are even possible if we must avoid giving offense. This is the very opposite of what Voltaire expressed, i.e. that it is intolerance of and respect for the opinions of others that we can best hope to arrive at truths about ourselves and about objective reality. Meanwhile, Trudeau brags of how Canada is leading the world in the application of artificial intelligence to cull the internet of all offensive speech. He says this, quote, while always ensuring and defending free speech, we, himself, must make it clear that it cannot be okay to bully and attack people online, because he's never done that. Governments and especially big technology companies need to did you hear that? Governments and especially big technology companies need to safeguard people's data and privacy and address online harassment and violence to ensure trust in technology. Talk to Kip Warner about that. He'll have a different story. So the translation of this confusing word salad is this. We, government and big tech, are your masters. We know best, and we will control what you plebeians can say online. We will define what terms like harassment and violence mean, but you can be certain that they will particularly apply to anything you say about us. Put simply, we are going to censor you. And as for that pesky constitutional protection of free speech, enshrined in Section 2B of the increasingly irrelevant and battered Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Trudeau government has an answer for that too. Although quite ready to criticize the Ford government in Ontario for invoking it to quell labor unrest in Ontario, we have seen that Trudeau has no qualms about turning to the notwithstanding clause or even declaring a faux public emergency in order to abrogate once inalienable charter rights. He says, our Prime Minister says this about our charter. The proactive use of the notwithstanding clause suspends people's rights and freedoms. So that's what's happening at the tops of the trees. So what's the point here? Limited speech can never be free. That's the point. Especially when such limits are prescribed by oppressive rulers for political ends, rather than pursuant to proper application of the rule of law. And this was so in 1215, when the autocratic power of a tyrannical English king was made subject to the will of Parliament. It was so when John Milton addressed his great cautionary essay on limited free speech, Areopagitica, to that same Parliament nearly 4 centuries ago. And it remains true today, right here, right now, in the benighted true north, strong and free. So I'll finish with this. The importance of words. Words, words, words. Anyone know that? Know their Hamlet? Words are really, really important. In law, in medicine, in health, in politics, media, religion, and tech. Think of AI, okay? That's code translated into words. It's chat GPT, right? Okay? Words are powerful. But they don't just belong to the people at the tops of the trees. They belong to us down here at the roots and all along the trunk. It's our tree. God spoke the universe into existence. Christ changed the world through his words in the gospel. And it is free speech, it is our speech, which makes us free and expresses the good. In this way, it is we, and not the state, who are most responsible and most capable of speaking our God-given, not state-given, rights into existence. But this is a duty. And it is this duty which Dietrich Bonhoeffer called the cost of discipleship. And it's this cost of discipleship, the willingness to speak out, the willingness to go get in a truck, organize a convoy, the willingness to head up organizations that fund legal challenges, the willingness to be a doctor who speaks out when you know it's wrong, even though it's going to cost you your livelihood. It's that cost of discipleship, which is our only true antidote to tyranny. Thank you very much.